first word ilah in Arabic, which is commonly translated like we say la ilaha illallah, there's no God except Allah, right? So the word ilah is commonly translated as God, but it's actually a very profound, deep, and heavy word of the Arabic language. The word ilah from alaha ya'lahu actually means to worship. And because of it, some have taken the word ilah and translated it as ma'bud in Arabic, which means the object of worship. Meaning that's when they translate there's no one worthy of worship except Allah. That's what it comes from when they look at it as alaha ya'lahu ilahan. But there is a subtle difference between them. In the Arabic language, when you say ma'bud, you're saying someone who deserves to be worshipped or someone that is worshipped. When you say ilah, it's what's called an infinitive, a masdar, which means worship itself. And the equivalent of that from the same origin would have been the word ma'lu, the one to be worshipped. But instead of saying ma'lu, Allah says ilah. Now what does that do? It actually suggests that there is no actual worship ever being done unless it's being done for Allah. Like worship in its true nature is only really done when it's done for Allah. So you're not just saying there's no God except Allah. You're actually saying nobody's actually truly even experienced what worship means unless they've done it for Allah. They may have had some spiritual experiences, they may have had some rituals that they participated in, but Allah is making this bold statement that you haven't experienced God like you should have, or spirituality like you should have, unless it was dedicated to Allah Azza wa Jal Himself. The second meaning of ilah comes from aliha ila fulanin, and that actually in the Arabic language means to find peace in someone, to find contentment in someone, to turn to someone when you're sad or overwhelmed. That's why it's paralleled with faza'a ila fulanin, awuli'a bi fulanin, to be desperate for someone also. The word ilah actually means you're not going to find any peace anywhere except with Allah. You're not going to find contentment anywhere else except Allah. There's no one to run to or turn to in desperation except Allah. Allah is the only companionship you'll ever possibly have. That's within the meanings of ilah. When we just translate it as there's no one worthy of worship except Allah, we just skip over all these beautiful meanings. Then the implication of aliha is also tahayyara, to be amazed or overwhelmed or be in awe of someone. And so la ilaha illallah, actually one of its implications is there's nothing to be in awe of, nothing to be amazed by like Allah is. Like nothing in life will ever overwhelm you and put you in humility like Allah Azza wa Jal will. And then of course, as we go further, one of my favorite meanings, and that's where our discussion about ilah will actually begin. Some scholars of language actually argued that aliha or ilah doesn't come from hamza, lam, and ha, like a, la, ha. It actually comes from wala, waw, lam, and ha. And that's what's called ibdal in Arabic. The waw can turn into a hamza, and that could come from multiple origins. When you say it's waliha, or waliha yalahu, that actually means to have desperate or intense love for someone. And it's one of the brands of love that I'll talk to you about in a second, but it's actually to be overwhelmed in love, so much so that you don't even feel any pain even if you are in pain. You don't feel hunger even if you are in hunger. Like that love itself becomes your appetite. That's what fulfills you. So with that little bit of an introduction of what the word ilah suggests, Allah is not introducing Himself when He calls Himself ilah as just a God. That's one of the base meanings of it. But He's someone that you turn to in desperation, someone that you have intense love for, someone that you turn to when you're looking for peace and contentment, someone that in your most desperate of times is going to be there for you, and of course the incredible object of your love. Now the Arabs, back in the day, they were really obsessed with this idea of love. And they had lots of words for it. Actually, I'll give you a list. Al-hawa, al-sabwa, al-shaghaf, al-wajd, al-kalaf, al-ishq, al-najwa, al-shawq, al-wasab, al-istikana, al-wud, al-khulla, al-gharam, al-hub, al-wala, al-hiyam. Actually, I used to think there were 9 or 10 levels of love. I actually found that there are 14 in the Arabic language. 14 degrees of love. And each one of them suggests something. Like the least of love, they say is hawa, which is like when you lust someone. It's just a base kind of love, meaning you're just physically impressed with somebody and there's nothing more to it than that. And it keeps building from there, right? So for example, al-wajd, one of the degrees of love, I won't go through all of them. Maybe another seminar on just love, inshallah. But al-wajd is, for example, when you really miss someone, when that love makes you really miss somebody, then you have al-wajd, When that love becomes heavy on your heart, it's called al-kalaf, like it's like a burden you're carrying. That's another degree of love. An-najwa is actually a kind of love that you have to keep secret because it keeps showing on your face. Like you can't even hide it that you're just, completely and absolutely in love. Al-istikana is the kind of love that makes you feel paralyzed. You can't even get out of bed just thinking about it. It overwhelms you, you know. And so of these degrees of love, when you go all the way to the end, let me take you all the way to the last degree of love that the Arabs believe is the last degree of love. They all actually call it al-hiyam. And al-hiyam in Arabic is from the verb hama, which is used for camels when they're looking for water, when they run out of water, and they're wandering in the desert looking for water. And they're aimlessly, they go a few steps this way, then they go a few steps that way, then they go a few steps that way. Aimless wandering, looking for water. That's called hama. It's the expression, for example, hama fi kulli wadin. Somebody's wandering like a crazy person aimlessly in this direction or that direction. In other words, they argue that the last degree of love is the one that drives you insane and renders you completely useless. You've gone crazy. So that's the last one, which means it's not healthy. It's actually annihilation. It's self-annihilation. That's hiyam. One less than that. So it's the last one will kill you, but the last one that's still healthy, the one that you can have, and it's the most intense you can have, is actually al-wala. Al-wala is the kind of love that makes you feel no pain, that fulfills you even in the most desperate and void of times, when everything else is going wrong. So long as you have this love, you feel like you don't need anything else. All your other needs have been satisfied. And that's from the origin of the word Illah. So when, for example, some Christian friends come and tell me, our God is love, but your God is not love. You believe in Allah, and He's not, actually, He's our Illah, which actually suggests that He is the most intense love that can ever be experienced, you know? Then it just changes your perspective on فَسَيَكْفِيكَهُمُ اللَّهُ. Allah will be enough for you. Allah will be enough for you. Like Allah, in the sense of even the love that is going to fulfill your life, will be enough for you. So it begins with, just summarizing, it begins with the object of worship, and it goes on to all these other things. But now, Ayatul Kursi does not begin with La ilaha illallah. It begins Allahu La ilaha illa huwa. It's a different organization a little bit. There's an additional word even if you don't know the Arabic language. There's the word Allah in the beginning, and then there's the word huwa at the end again. You could just make this shorter and just say La ilaha illallah, right? But Allah put the word Allah as the subject of this sentence, the mubtada of this sentence, and then the khabar of it is a sentence by itself. Let's understand why that happens. If you remember, a few minutes ago I told you that this ayah is made up of 9 declarations. And each one of them is actually a continuation of the word Allah. So the word Allah, there are 9 sentences in the ayah. And I want you to think, let's think about this in English for a second. For each of those 9 sentences, the first word in that sentence is the word Allah, even if you don't say it. Allahu la ilaha illahu al-hayyul qayyum. Allahu la ta'khudhuhu sinatun wa la nawm. Allahu lahu ma fis samawati wa ma fil ard. It's like that. For each one of those statements, you first think of the word Allah and then that statement. Then the word Allah and then that statement. Then the word Allah and then that statement. So Allah becomes the subject of all 9 of the declarations that are coming. So we're going to put, and that's the benefit of putting the word Allah in the beginning like that, is that's what it does. It actually allows us to think of each one of those as a continuation, like as if here are the 9 things you need to know about Allah. Allah, so and so and such and such and such. And Allah, such and such and such. Allah, such and such and such. It's really beautiful that Allah did that, subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so now, and what's amazing about that also, is notice Allah, there is no one worthy of worship, obedience, love, to find contentment and peace in except He. That's the word Illah, right? But notice in that sentence when I tried to translate it, I said except He. I used the pronoun He. For each one of these 9 sentences, the pronoun that goes back to Allah will keep coming up. Meaning the style, the signature of Allah in these 9 sentences is, they start with the word Allah, and somehow or the other they mention Allah as a pronoun again. Allah, that's who He is. La ta'khudhuhu sinatun wa la nawm. Lahu ma fis samawati ma fil ard. Man dhal ladhi yashfa'u 'indahu illa bi idhnihi. Ya'lamu has the word huwa in it. Ma bayna aydihim wa ma khalfahum. Wa la yuhituna bi shay'in min 'ilmihi illa bima sha'a. Wasi'a kursiyuhu, the who again, as-samawati wal ard. Wa la ya'uduhu hifdhuhuma. Wa huwa al-'aliyyul 'azim. Subhanallah. Every one of them goes back to Allah. Ya'ud ila Allah azza wa jalla. Keeps going back, keeps going back, keeps going back. And the thing is, in Arabic they say ad-damiru ya'udu ila al-aqrab. The pronoun, when you use the word He, it goes back to a noun. The only noun here is Allah. And that's how they all keep going back to Allah Azza wa Jal. So now, when He makes this absolute declaration, there's not even such a thing as finding peace except Allah. There's no such thing as finding love, true love, except Allah. There's no such thing as finding fulfillment except Allah. There's no such thing as actual worship except Allah. No one to be worshipped except Allah. And even these notions of love, fulfillment, peace, Allah is making this incredible statement. Not only is He the object of these things, but these experiences in and of themselves you've never had except with Allah. Everything you've had is just a fraction. The real thing is only when you find Allah. And that is who He is. That's the first thing He wanted us to know about Him. Allahu la ilaha illa huwa. La ilaha illa huwa. And so about now Himself, He's going to continue to describe. This first statement is now going to conclude with two of His names. He decides to give us the two names Al-Hayy and Al-Qayyum. Al-Hayy, Al-Qayyum. Which, it's tough to translate. Al-Hayy can be translated as the living, right? That's an easy translation. And Al-Qayyum, the maintainer, the caretaker. And so we're going to dig into each of these words a little bit so we appreciate how these things are now coming together. فالتعريف بأل هي دلالة على الكمال والقصر لأن ما سواه يصيبه الموت. The al in al-hayy, you heard the word al when you said Allahu la ilaha illa huwal hayyul qayyum. That al actually suggests something that is perfect or complete. And it also suggests that something other than Him is missing it. And that the reason the word al-hayy, the living, is used in the sense that the absolute source of life and the one truly living is Allah. Every other thing that exists that has life. I have life, plants have life, animals can have life. Everything else that has life is missing something in it because it'll be struck down by death. Eventually it will all be struck down by death. And at one point, all of those things were dead to begin with. Kuntum amwatan, you used to be dead to begin with, right? But Allah, when He says Al-Hayy, there was never any death that was a part of Him, nor will death ever be experienced by Him, subhanahu wa ta'ala. He created the institution of death. In a sense, He even distinguished Himself, Him being the ultimately living, from everything besides Him. It's also, and when we combine these two words, I'll share some more things with you. We're not believing in a God that just is all powerful or some force, like Star Wars style, the force is with you, or some unseen thing that kind of you can manipulate and use, and it's like a machine or a program or some kind of consciousness or whatever. This is actually a living being. He's full of life, He's not just a machine. Like some people say, well, I don't believe in God, but I believe in nature. Or I believe in the force. Or I believe in the universe, Or I believe in the laws of nature. These laws that are blind, that don't have a consciousness, that just govern themselves. They're just free-floating things, Or philosophers would believe in abstract ideas that have no consciousness. Allah Azza wa Jal describes Himself as Al-Hayy, saying, how can you actually experience love, adoration? Human beings, when they find peace in someone, when they desperately turn to someone, when they have a relationship with someone, when they love someone, it would have to be someone living. It would have to be. The first statement, Allahu la ilaha illa huwa, is invalid if it's directed to someone who doesn't even have life. It would necessarily have to be someone who possesses life, Even when people worship stones, idols, they actually believe behind this idol is someone living. If they genuinely believed all this is a stone, they wouldn't be able to worship it. They'd have to attribute some kind of life to it. Allah says, why go for some form of life or another? Go for the source of all life, Al-Hayy. Al-Hayy. And so He adds to that the incredible thing, just because someone is alive doesn't mean they care. Those are two different things. You could worship someone, or let's not talk about worship, let's take a lesser example. You believe in the power of a king. He's alive, and so he still has authority, but that doesn't mean the king cares for you. Just because you accept his authority as the king doesn't mean that he's going to take care of his subjects. Those are two different things. When He says Al-Qayyum, He actually adds His attribute that not only is He living, that He actually takes care. And it's a pretty interesting word to use in combination with Al-Hayy. Because if He's living, the first thought would have been that He'll hear my prayers. He'll hear when I ask Him for help. He'll hear when I plead, when I'm in need. But before you get to even mention your need, He says, I'm taking care of you. Al-Qayyum. Like, whether you ask or not, I'm still taking care of you. There are people who never ask Allah anything. Allah still takes care of every heartbeat they have. Allah still takes care of every breath they take. He's still Qayyum to them without them even asking. He is Al-Hayy like no one else. When you found out that Allah is Al-Hayy and you turn to Him in desperation in the first sentence, or in the first part of this sentence, when you said Allahu la ilaha illa huwa, when you turn to Him, as Ilah if you turn to anybody else in desperation. They won't know your needs until you ask, until you come before them. And they may not ever be able to take care of you until you express. There are people who even love you and they're hurting you. There are people who love you and they're hurting you. And until you let them know you're actually hurting me, they'll say, I had no idea I was hurting you. I had no clue. Why didn't you say this sooner? Until we express, it's not there. Sometimes we feel neglected. You're like, I don't think you're taking care of me. I don't think you're taking care of what you're supposed to. And you have to bring it to the attention of the one who's neglectful. But Allah, remarkably, subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's establishing the foundations of my relationship with Him. He is alive, which means He's constantly there. And you're not just speaking into thin air. Your pleas are being answered and someone is listening. But even when you're not asking, He's constantly taking care. So now let's dig into this word al-qayyum. صيغة المبالغة على وزن غير مشهور ومن معاني الكلمة القائم في تدبير أمر خلقه في إنشائهم وتدبيرهم. It's actually a hyperbolized form of the word. قائم is maintainer. قائم is maintainer. Someone who maintains repeatedly is qawwam, like الرجال قوامون على النساء. The word qawwam. But qayyum is actually fay'ul, which is very rare use of the Arabic language. Making some words spell like this, qayyum like that, it's not a normal thing in Arabic to do. So it's a mubalagha, it is a hyperbole, but it's not a usual one. And that's Allah's way of telling us that Allah is taking care in a way that is unusual, unprecedented. The closest thing to this word that comes in the Quran is actually used for people, and it's used for men who take care of women. الرجال قوامون على النساء. Like sons take care of their mothers, or they take care of older parents and things like that, or you take care of your daughters, or you take care of the spouse, or you take care of the women in your family, etc. That's qawamuna ala nisa, because you maintain and you make sure they're doing okay. You make sure they're not starving. You make sure they're safe and things like that. Whose job is it to make sure all the doors are locked at night, or to make sure everybody's at home, or they're not. If somebody's not calling you back, your sister's not calling you back, and you're worried about where are you, or somebody's traveling, who's going to make sure everything's going okay? It's the men of the family. They're the qawwam, but not qayyum. In other words, Allah takes care in ways that even creation can't. And so He says, Al-qa'imu fi tadbiri amri khalqihi. It's someone who takes care of the planning. And not only did Allah maintain or design how we were created, but He also maintains our entire plan for how we're going to live. Lay it all out. That's part of Him being Al-qayyum. Al-qa'imu ala kulli shay also means the one overseeing everything. Al-qayyum, extremely vigilantly overlooking everything constantly. It reminds me of a phrase in Arabic. It's used in Ali Imran for when somebody owes somebody money, right? Somebody owes somebody money and they're not paying them back. And the guy who wants his money back keeps calling, shows up at the door. He's like harassing the guy, إِلَّا مَا دُمْتَ عَلَيْهِ قَائِمًا. Until you stand constantly over him, just standing over him like, hey, come on. So there's this harassment necessary, vigilance necessary to get your money back from that guy. You have to stay on his case over and over and over again. That's the word qa'im. Allah Azza wa Jal uses the word al-qayyum, and in it there's an interesting imagery. وَلِلَّهِ الْمَثَلُ الْأَعْلَى. We're just talking about imagery right now. Qa'im actually means standing. Qa'im means standing. When someone's standing over something and watching something or taking care of something, and when someone's sitting down and taking care of something, there's a difference. If I was, for example, asked to take responsibility and watch over something, and I'm just sitting back and watching, that actually means I'm not as actively involved. If I'm standing over, it actually shows I'm more vigilant, more active. That's why al-qa'im الذي لا ينعس ولا ينام لأنه لو كان ذلك لا يكون قيوما وقد يكون قائما. The one who doesn't get exhausted, doesn't get sleepy or drowsy. Think of a security guard. We'll get to that analogy a little later too. Think of a security guard. He's sitting back, supposed to be watching the lobby or whatever. When you sit for a while, what happens? I've gone to plenty of buildings where the security guard's earning a passive income, literally, the idea of qa'im is someone who's watching over something vigilantly. But even when someone's standing, is it possible someone's standing and still dozing off? Does that happen? Sure. That's not possible if you call someone qayyum though. Because the mubalagha keeps it from being passive. keeps it from being lackadaisical. It's like someone who really, truly watches over, diligently watches over, cares for, maintains, and does so consistently in a way that nobody else does. That's the meaning of Al-Qayyum. But now, if you combine these two, Allahu la ilaha illa huwa al-hayy al-qayyum. There's no point accepting someone as ilah if they're not living. I already made that point. And there's still no point accepting someone as ilah and they're living if they don't care. Like if they don't maintain or take care of you or take care of things around you, why would you even want to worship them? Like it's, and they're alive but incapable, or alive or insensitive. Allah Azza wa Jal combined both, Al-Hayy, Al-Qayyum. And the other interesting thing, this statement that He's the living and He's the one who takes care. If the mushrikun were challenged by this statement, because if you have other gods that you think are alive, you have other gods that you think take care of your business, they should be so offended by this statement from Allah that He's the only one who does this, that they should stand up and they should send their own messages. They should challenge Allah. They should send their own miracles. They should convince their patrons of their own legitimacy. No one stands when Allah says Al-Hayyul Qayyum. Every false god's lack of life and every false god's inability to be Al-Qayyum becomes established just in that statement, because nobody ever comes to challenge it. So now, لا تأخذه سنة ولا نوم. We move along to the second statement. لا تأخذه سنة ولا نوم. Drowsiness doesn't grab a hold of him, neither does sleep. That's a rough translation of لا تأخذه سنة ولا نوم. السنة النعاس من غير النوم والوسنان من ليس بمستغرق في نومه. They say in Arabic, sina, which is from the Arabic origin wasan, is when you are kind of sleeping but not truly sleeping. It's kind of like some people that are listening to this right now. They're coming in and out of consciousness. That is sina. When you're totally out and the person next to you can hear you snore, that's naum. Naum is when you're inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un, you're done, down for the count. But when you're still kind of nodding off a little bit, they say يأخذه غشي يأخذ الإنسان لوقت قصير. Something that kind of overtakes a person for a short period of time. Like if you're driving and it's been really late night and for a second you kind of, it just happened. That was actually sinah. Someone's been awake and active and over caring for something, taking care of something. What's natural to happen? You get tired. Allah just described Himself as alive. Then Allah described Himself as someone who actively takes care. By the way, He doesn't even mention what He takes care of. Al-Qayyumu ala khalqihi. The maintainer over all of His creation. He didn't say that. He just said the maintainer. In other words, He maintains things that you can think of. He maintains things you can't even think of. He maintains things in the seen. He maintains things in the unseen. He maintains things inside of you and outside of you. It's an unlimited number of applications when someone's taking care. Now, the thing is, the appreciation of Allah, the true appreciation of Allah, is in actually acknowledging what He does in comparison to what we're capable of doing. That's the real appreciation of Allah. Whenever He gives Himself a name, He gives Himself an attribute, you'll notice a lot of those names, you can actually give those names to yourself too. Allah is, for example, Al-Hakim, the wise. There are people that have wisdom. Allah is Alim, the knowledgeable. There are people that have knowledge. Allah, for example, is Rahim. There are people that have mercy. His names, sometimes people share those names. But when you start to imagine what people do with these attributes, how far are they able to go? And then what Allah does, then you realize how supreme Allah is above His creation. وَهُوَ الْقَاهِرُ فَوْقَ عِبَادِهِ. So how far above? He makes us realize how far above His creation He is. So let's compare for a second. We're not talking about Allah now, we're talking about our own weakness. Someone's taking care of something. You're taking care of business, family, home, a sick member of the family in the hospital. You're taking care of all kinds of things. What happens eventually? You need to sleep or no? You get tired or no? Somebody says, my cousin's in the ER, I'm going to go. I'm going to sit right next to him. No, I don't need to sit, I'll stand. You'll stand for 1 hour, 2 hours. Eventually, what are you going to do? You're going to sit down. When you're going to sit down, no, I don't need to sleep. The nurse will say, hey, you want to lie down on the couch? No, I'm fine. Eventually, no matter how badly you want to take care, you want to watch over, what's going to happen to you? Whether you like it or not, you're going to fall asleep. Allah says, لا تأخذه سنة. Even drowsiness doesn't get a hold of him. Forget sleep. That's why sleep is mentioned second. Obviously, the first step towards sleep is drowsiness, exhaustion. That doesn't even ever touch him. Then how can sleep? So now he's a maintainer and a caretaker that is not only willing, but also capable like no one else. No one else has that capability of taking care of us the way that Allah Azza wa Jal does without exhaustion. ذكر السنة قبل النوم. I mentioned that. لم يضع لام التعريف. That's the other interesting thing. لا تأخذه سنة ولا نوم, as opposed to السنة and النوم. The al's are missing. Previously you saw الحي القيوم. Now you see them missing. In the negation, when they're missing, what that means is even the least bit of drowsiness, even the least possibility of sleep, isn't ever going to get a hold of him. The least of it is denied. This is the perfection of the language of Quran. If you say لا تأخذه السنة ولا النوم, if you put al on it, then drowsiness in the worst sense, in the absolute sense, doesn't get a hold of him. But that means in some sense it might. Or like total sleep doesn't get him. When you say total sleep doesn't get him, you might be suggesting, well, partial sleep might. So he's actually using the most minimal of the forms to let us know that there's no possibility of sina or no, meaning drowsiness or sleep. Now I want you to remember where the sentence begins. The beginning of this second sentence is not لا تأخذه سنة ولا نوم. The beginning of the sentence is the word Allah. Allah لا تأخذه سنة ولا نوم. Allah, nothing grabs a hold of him. Allah, exclamation, no drowsiness grabs a hold of him, nor does any sleep whatsoever. When you put Allah in the beginning like that, this is what you call فَذَلِكَ يُشِيرُ إِلَى إِثْبَاتِ غَيْرِ الْفَاعِلِ. It actually alludes to other than Allah. Allah, in fact, none of this ever happens to him. By comparison, it will happen to all else. And that will remind you of how perfect Allah is. And that will actually remind you of the first statement. That is truly being Al-Hayy. Because everything else experiences sleep. And when they experience sleep, we know sleep is a form of what? Of death. Of death. And when you're sleeping, you can't take care of anything. You can't be qa'im. Forget qayyum. So Allah is proving how He is. He can only be Al-Hayyul Qayyum in the statement, لا تأخذه سنة ولا نوم. You people can't. No one else can. And so, now you get to this is a little bit of an observation about the language of the Quran, but I think it's important to mention. لو قال لا تأخذه سنة ونوم. If you say drowsiness and sleep, don't get a hold of him. Listen carefully to the English. Forget the Arabic for a second. Drowsiness and sleep, don't catch him. When you say it like that, the word I put in between was and. Drowsiness and sleep, don't catch him. You know what that does? It's problematic. It actually means when they both come together, they don't bother him. But if they come separately, they might. You see? For example, if I say, I don't like fries and ketchup. If I say that. That still means I might like fries and mustard. But anyway, some people, strange. Actually, the French have it with mayonnaise or something. Weird. Or they did some, I don't know what they had, but they offered me fries. And I said, I'm in France, I need to have French fries. So they said, oh, you mean freedom fries? Like, don't be smart about it. We're over the Bush era, thank you. But they gave me fries, but they didn't have ketchup. They had some mustard thing. I was like, so when you say, I don't like fries and ketchup, that doesn't actually mean you don't like, that it still could mean you still like fries. You just don't like the combination. If you say, drowsiness and sleep doesn't catch Allah, that's a problematic statement, because that you could mean drowsiness on its own might catch him, or sleep on its own might catch him. It's just the combination that never gets him. Allah didn't say that. He didn't put an and in between them like that. There's a la wa la. If you look at the word or, لا تأخذه سنة أو no, drowsiness or sleep don't catch him. If he said it like that, which he didn't, then that actually means drowsiness on its own will never get him. Sleep on its own will never get him. But a combination might. A combination might get him. Because you say, I don't like this by itself or that by itself. But together I might. You see? So the aw would have been problematic. Somebody could have pulled out something and said, hey, but wait a second. I mean, you only negated these things in isolation. But together they may be something else. What did Allah do? لا تأخذه سنة ولا نوم. And Neither. Neither does, drowsiness get him, nor does sleep get him. Not by saying neither nor, Allah negated both of them individually and together. Whether they come on their own or they're together, it doesn't matter. It never gets a hold of it. This is part of just the perfection of how Allah Azza wa Jal speaks. يَسْأَلُهُ مَنْ فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ كُلَّ يَوْمٍ هُوَ فِي شَأْنٍ. Everyone and everything, actually, in this ayah, everyone is begging Allah, is pleading to Allah for something or another. In the skies and the earth. فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. Who's taking care of the angels? Who's taking care of the jinn? Not just the human beings. Who's taking care of all the creatures of Allah in the skies and in the earth? They all need something from Him to continue to survive. Every one of our lives depends on Allah. Recently I met some people whose family was on life support. They were in the isolation ward, and their family member was on life support. And that basically means now their heart and their lungs are being pumped into by a machine. Their lungs don't function on their own, and as soon as you take them off the machine, they're basically dead. And it made me realize something. We're all on life support. Nobody's not on life support. My heart's not beating on its own. Like, the doctor makes you feel like this machine is making this heart beat. If it was a healthy heart, it would have been beating on its own. Actually, it's never beating on its own. Allah is providing every next beat. Allah is providing every next breath. SubhanAllah. That's how we are alive, because of Al-Hayy. And that's constant caretaking. Nothing is automatic. Nothing is automatic. Every single one of these is an active decision by Allah. Every one of them. Allah didn't create something and just let it go. We think of it like that. You can create a machine like a watch, right? And you wound it up and it's running on its own. Now the manufacturer doesn't have to keep over the watch. It's just running its time, its course. So long as the battery is there, or so long as the wind up is there, it'll keep running. Allah didn't create us that way. We're not on automatic. We're caught every second of our existence, every cell of our existence, every subatomic particle of our existence is constantly being maintained by Allah. Constantly being maintained. وَلَا تَسْقُطُ مِنْ وَرَقَةٍ. There's not a leaf that falls that Allah is not maintaining. So كُلَّ يَوْمٍ هُوَ فِي شَأْنٍ. Every single day He is involved in something or another. So these two statements now, just to summarize, we have to get through 9, I know. But these two statements so far, what have they done? They've brought me two things. They've made me appreciate Allah as someone that is the object of my love, who I'm going to find peace and contentment in. They've also given me reassurance that Allah is living, and that He's the reason I'm alive, and that He's going to take care of me and never abandon me, because He takes care in ways that nobody else can. And anybody else in His place would have been exhausted or burnt out by now. لا تأخذه سنة ولا نوم. But now with that closeness to Allah, the beauty of Quran is, first He brings you close. Then He puts you at a distance. Then He brings you close. Then He puts you at a distance. Now why would Allah put you at a distance? That sounds bad. No, it's not bad. Because there are two dimensions of my relationship with Allah. One dimension of my relationship with Allah is how close I must be with Him. The other dimension of my relationship with Allah is recognizing how far above me He is. How much more superior to myself He is. Allah to us is the king, but Allah to us is also the best friend. Isn't He? And the relationship He has with me as my king, as my ruler, is different from the relationship He has with me as my friend. A friend is someone you keep close. You can talk to anything about your friend, about anything to your friend. You can turn to your friend whenever you want. You complain to your friend. You cry to your friend. That's what you do with your friend. Do you chill with your king, your ruler? Do you just, hey, I want to talk to you about something personal? When you're in the presence of a king, you're in awe. You're reserved. You're humbled. You're scared. You recognize the authority. That's a relationship of distance, isn't it? Now the thing is, the closest analogy to this, because we don't live in a kingdom, so we don't have that kind of situation. But I'll give you another analogy: the classroom, the teacher and students. A teacher has to walk a fine line between being a friend and an authority. If a teacher is constantly a friend, students will eat him or her alive. They will listen to nothing. I've tried it. I used to teach kids, and I was a nice guy. It didn't work out. Because all you do is make jokes, tell stories, jump on the table, and do a magic trick or something. Astaghfirullah al-azim, la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. When you do that for a few days, and I thought, yeah, these kids are gonna love me. I'm gonna have so much fun with them. So when time comes to teach, they will listen to what I say. And I walked in, I was inexperienced as a teacher. That was my 3rd grade class. All kinds of crazy stuff. And they're laughing and screaming and they're clapping when I walked in. I used to get a standing ovation when I walked into class. The principal used to walk, is everything okay? I'm like, yeah, we're just having a good time. And like, have you caught up with your lessons? Yeah, this week, inshallah. Let me just break the ice with these guys. 2 days later, I say, I'm gonna start teaching them. Hey guys, open up the textbook, page 10. No, do that thing with your ear. Stand on the table again. Tell another scary story. No guys, it's time to learn now. No, we don't want authority, we want friend. You see? If I give too much friend, what happens? I lose what? I lose authority. If I give too much authority, then the only relationship left is fear, and I lose them as a friend. And if I want my students to be motivated and to feel like they can talk to me about their problems and to connect with me, then I do want them to respect my authority, but at the same time, I do need to be their friend. That's the nature of a healthy relationship because it requires both. Now let's understand what Allah Azza wa Jalla is to us, who He is to us. On the one hand, there's no one closer to us than Allah. But if that's all there is, then you get like a little out of hand. Then people just feel like they can just talk to Allah like they're talking to anybody. Hey, that's Allah you're talking to. You've got to maintain who He is. Our closeness to Him, our intimacy with Him, our relation, our loving bond and relationship with Him is there, but our awe of Him cannot go away.